But we also have to pray for clarity and transparency. And let's take a look at this Rich Lowry piece, because big crowds, massive crowds, are wonderful and healthful if they're woke, he writes. Otherwise, they're life-threatening. Earlier this week, the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, had really big news. Chicago is finally opening up its iconic Lakefront Trail after months of being closed off as part of the COVID-19 lockdown. That the mayor kept the trail closed, even after Chicago had experienced large-scale Black Lives Matter marches, thousands just last weekend during the Drag March for Change, is one small instance of the flagrant social distancing hypocrisy across the country, Rich Lowry writes at National Review. If it's okay for throngs of people to pack the streets and shout and chant to protest George Floyd's death, it ought to be permissible for someone to ride a bike along the lakeside while keeping to him or herself. In fact, one involves sustained interaction with other people, perhaps fights with the police, while the other is a solitary activity, or maybe one undertaken with a friend or spouse. Yet Mayor Lightfoot welcomed the protesters. She said, quote, "We want people to come and express their passion." The mayor of Chicago, it must be said, not only failed to talk about any of the health concerns of all the thousands and thousands of people protesting, she encouraged it. She invited them. But by golly, she kept that lakefront trail closed. Many of the same officials who were most zealous in locking down their states, he says, instantly made an exception for Black Lives Matter protests. Their rigidity became laxity in a blink of an eye. Visiting the deathbed of a loved one with COVID? Absolutely not. Having a proper funeral? No way. Gathering more than 10 people at a graveside? No one can be allowed to put the public at risk in such a way. Bringing thousands of strangers together to march for hours in spontaneous, disorderly groups? Thank you for your commitment to positive change. Attending a church service? Well, maybe in a couple of months. Holding a struggle session with religious trappings where people confess their racism and vow to work to defund and dismantle the police? Yeah, let's have more of that. Please, let's have more. The wholly unserious Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Rich writes, professed to be deeply disturbed by the protest against her arbitrary lockdown rules. Remember her? You couldn't buy, seeds in one part of the Home Depot, but you could buy eggs. She spun nightmare scenarios of a spike in COVID-19. That didn't stop her earlier in the month. She literally joined a march against police brutality with hundreds of non-socially distanced people, explaining, well, that was an important moment to show her support. Virtue signaling, Rich Lowry writes, is now an essential activity in the state of Michigan. To believe the leaders of Blue America, COVID-19 is the first virus in human history to have a social conscience. Virulent enough in the ordinary course of events to justify the most restrictive social controls, but not such a big deal if it might get in the way of marches for social justice. The likes of Bill de Blasio have justified the different standards, he writes, by arguing that fighting racism is important. Well, so's mourning your dad, your mom, your family, your dead. So's keeping your business from being ground into dust and worshiping your Lord and God. It's a sign, he says, of a ludicrously blinkered worldview to believe that a protest march deserves more consideration than these other elemental human needs. Another argument is that the protesters are willing to put their health on the line for their cause, a sign of their deep-felt devotion to their cause. But until recently, it was said that people going outside weren't just endangering themselves, but the most vulnerable residents of our communities. Why isn't that true of the Black Lives Matter marches as well? He asks. Don't expect consistency or even a serious attempt at it, writes Rich Lowry in National Review. More than 1,000 public health experts signed a letter calling the protests vital to the national public health. Let me repeat that. More than 1,000 public health experts signed a letter calling the protests vital to the national public health, thus immolating their credibility on a pyre of motivated reasoning. Rich Lowry says this is social distancing for people and activities they find uncongenial and different rules for their ideological allies. What a contemptible betrayal of the public trust. What a contemptible betrayal of the public trust. No wonder these so-called experts and politicians are not trustworthy. They are laughable. They're clowns. This is clownish. And get ready for the clowns to screech to the heavens over President Trump's rally this Saturday night in Tulsa. A rally, by the way, that was moved to Saturday because the president and his campaign wanted to demonstrate sensitivity to Juneteenth.